Known only by K, arrives at a village that is managed by an elusive bureaucracy that keeps in this castle. K arrives at the village as a land surveyor, and in short, begins his journey to request acceptance from the authorities residing within the castle walls. This, of course, in a very Kafkaesque approach, is filled with obstacles which make reaching the castle a seemingly impossible In the novel The Castle by Franz Kafka, the central figure, known only by K, arrives at a village that is managed by an elusive bureaucracy. That keeps in this castle. K arrives at the village as a land surveyor, and in short, begins his journey to request acceptance from the authorities residing within the castle walls. This, of course, in a very Kafkaesque approach, is filled with obstacles which make reaching the castle a seemingly impossible task. There is a moment in the novel that will be relevant to the discussion. This isn't just a completely random start to this. While in search for the castle to gain approval for working as a land surveyor in the village, K comes across a snow-covered bridge, where he stands at one end, gazing toward the opposite side, toward what seemed to be emptiness. While standing at one end of the bridge with his eyes fixed on the opposite end, he gets the sense of the presence of the castle. Though the castle is never shown to K, nor is it ever directly within the narrative, it is constantly present. Though never seen, it symbolically looms over the village in which it factually governs without ever being visibly there. Kafka's world is one without identifiable categories, but only concepts that are left to be named and placed. Concepts that are contained between the letters of every word, but never directly addressed, communicated without ever being spoken. This is a common characteristic throughout his work, and as we'll see, it's also a common characteristic throughout your own. However, unlike Kafka, your work probably doesn't build a meta-narrative around these woven concepts, but more or less builds around them. If you're not familiar with Kafka's work, and you begin with a novel like The Castle or The Trial, you may at first be somewhat baffled by his reputation as one of the greatest novelists of the 21st century. 20th century. not the 21st. Somewhat dry, simplistic, enigmatic style of surreal humor is laid out on a table without any covering, with Kafka himself standing beside it, pointing directly to every object that is presented. This seems too easy, He doesn't seem to want to hide anything. What he says, he means, and that's it. So what exactly is it that puts Kafka in such high regard in literary circles? How does one remove from the table all illusion, eccentric poetry, ornate prose, and still find their name amongst the likes of Dostoevsky, Goethe, and other such names, influencing writers of all genres 100 years on? Although there's many answers to this, there are two that are most important here. First is Kafka's direct and persistent narrative, the device that seemingly presents everything directly as is, providing relevant conditions of experience, is the exact device that conceals what it really is. As Camus put it in his essay Hope and the Absurd in the work of Franz Kafka, it is hard to speak of a symbol in a tale whose most obvious quality just happens to be naturalness. Kafka is presenting us with a kind of phenomenology, one that traditionally goes back to the things themselves. But instead of applying any methodological route to understanding what these things are, provides only the experience itself, which in turn is the true object of his narrative. Which brings us to the second answer of the question. When Kafka points over to the table with every object in clear sight, while stripping away all the techniques that may abandon the reader in fields of colorful imagery and metaphor, he reveals the craftsmanship of the table itself. The descriptions of the objects on the table serve no other purpose but to further point out the existence of their foundation. And this is all done by way of never mentioning the table at all, but by plainly and directly presenting the objects upon it which have nothing in themselves alone to do with what it is he's trying to get at. The objects are only relevant to their relationship with the experience, which in turn analyzes the table in which they sit upon. Kafka's objects are nothing more than a gateway to the experience of the foundation to which they exist. This foundation which he presents his world has become synonymous with the adjective Kafkaesque, a term I used earlier but in which he would probably reject, if for any reason but the fact that he would have seen no use for a new word to describe the existential existence he had been living all along. For Kafka, the word Kafkaesque is just an unnecessary word for what is. And it is this what is that is mapped out within the psychology of the fictional characters that correlate with a reality unspoken. What sets Kafka apart is a kind of world building, but it's not the kind of world building authors on this platform may typically engage in. This is a psychological, philosophical world building in which a map that is typically found in the fantasy novel is presented throughout. It is articulated behind the narrative itself. As stated, this is something that you do as well, possibly unaware, but being aware of this can improve one's character development and help avoid common mistakes that no one likes to read. It is this table or foundation in which the subject depends on. As elusive as it may seem, every novel opens with the reader standing at one end of this bridge, where the presence of this foundation can only be sensed at the other end, without ever being directly realized in any concrete sense. Whether one intends for it to be there or not, philosophy can be found on every written page, through what it is that's being communicated, and it is philosophy that will allow for interpretation and accent on the part of the reader. If it is not well mapped out beforehand, it most certainly will be present when all is said and done. And as we'll see here, the benefits of mapping it out beforehand greatly outweigh building it top down. However, this building can only be done to the degree in which you allow, and by no means should you map out a philosophical system in which your characters are then forced to follow. And before I start sounding like I'm contradicting myself, I should point out that the only reason why it sounds like that is because that's what I'm doing. By all means, map out a philosophical system for your characters, but by no means should this be strictly followed. It's important to note that fiction is a mode of representation, and what the author is determined to represent, though may not correlate to a reality observed empirically or even experienced, It can depict a certain truth that the reader understands and can be described as believable within the context in which it's presented. And before an author sets out to throw a character into the world against their say, a good question they should ask themselves is, how much freedom are you willing to designate to this character in which you are about to torture with the burden of existence? Before the mapping of any psychological disposition or philosophical worldview can be applied to a given character, there is the matter of the degrees of freedom that the author denotes to the characters. And what here is meant by freedom? How does a character thought up through imagination, existing abstractly, beyond the empirical, have any freedom granted in a manner that exists beyond whom imagined it into existence in the first place? There's no mediation of any ready-made philosophical category, which in turn removes any concept of a specific springboard in which every decision of a character must follow. Because this is not how people in reality live their lives. When it comes to our personal philosophical guidelines regarding any ethical system, we are all, at times, hypocrites. There's no insertion dialectically presented, but found only in action. We are presented with a new reality with the result of every lived situation. This plays out unavoidably for us in our day-to-day, and it will be unavoidable within the fictional guidelines you intend your work to follow. No matter how articulate you may be in your planning an outline for your New York Times bestseller, your antagonist will be faced with situations which a decision will have to be made. And let's say that you plan this decision out and exactly what it is. Well, the planning itself is the character making that decision. There must be a kind of fundamental freedom established that provides the character the act of decision making, even if this is before you've written anything down. It is the character, not the author, that weighs consequences and judges the outcome where a choice can then be acquired in view of a consistent mapped out psychology. And despite all of this, there will always be that moment in which the character is just left adrift. And this happens most frequently before the narrative itself plays out. This is because, unlike the world we live in, within your fiction, you are the one acting in part as the big other, the hypothetical I in which your characters perform. And I say in part, as the author will typically assume an audience and may consciously or unconsciously be performing or writing for them in mind. And therefore, you're not even the god in your own fictional world you invented. You may be the author, but it's never you alone that is producing the work. It will always be somewhat dictated by who it is you expect to read the work. But this is less relevant to what we're getting at here, and probably deserves its own whole discussion. The kind of freedom that we're discussing here is the kind of freedom that philosopher, novelist, playwright Jean-Paul Sartre introduced into his own fictional characters. He states in an interview in November of 1945, "Every one of my characters, after having done anything, may still do anything whatever. I never calculate whether the act is credible according to previous ones, but I take the situation and a freedom chained in situation. In Zola, everything obeys the strictest determinism. His books are written in the past, while my characters have a future." Though this is the kind of freedom that I'm suggesting, I'm not suggesting to apply it to the degree that Sartre would have for his characters. Obviously, it's not a necessity, as he points out, an author that does quite the opposite. But the thing that Sartre kind of misses in that quote in regard to Zola is he too would have had to have applied a freedom to his characters. It just would have taken place at a different time. For Zola, that freedom would have still happened just in the planning. And there's no real way around this. It is up to the author to provide that degree, but as stated earlier, there is a grade that the author must administer for there to be any progress. Now, how do you know if you've successfully created a free character? a character that acts in accordance with this freedom to the degree desired in order to represent the narrative? Well, there is an easy way to find out, but it may demand someone else reading your script. Do you ever read a novel or watch a film and midway through think to yourself, that is not what that character would have done, or not what they would have said? Well, how would you actually know that? What are the intentions and context of the character and situation? The reason you know this, and more often are correct when pointing it out, is because the author, whether they intend to or not, is presenting the reader or viewer with a psychology and philosophy that may have started off in conjunction with one another, but later in contradiction. Something immediately feels off. And this is not to say that the author can't have a character do something that is out of character. Of course, this happens all the time. Most often it is a turning point in the story. But it is important to recognize the laws you have implemented, or say boundaries of change, so that when this change does occur, it will not appear as an interruption, or it won't be perceived as an interruption, but only as multiple aspects that are assumed by the reader as a single basic identity. If the author is able to map out this character well in providing them with this fundamental freedom of choice, then when the character steps out of character and acts against what was a constant philosophical backdrop throughout the story, their psychology goes with it. When you say to yourself that is unrealistic in context to the action or actions of a character, it is because they go out of character while remaining in character. And this immediately becomes a glaring problem to the reader who does not necessarily even understand why this just happened, but they do know it. The reader is left standing at one end of the metaphorical bridge, and instead of sensing something there, they are sensing something missing. A perfect example of this, and a common complaint I used to hear about E.L. James' character, Anastasia Steele, is that she is unrealistic, one amongst many issues with that novel. However, she never did anything that would contradict the reality presented in the narrative. So what is it that made her unrealistic when everything that took place could be considered theoretically real? On the face of it, this shouldn't make any sense, but it does. So what is it that makes a bad character, apart from E.L. James? Well, apart from a character like E.L. James being a fictional character, she was also a fictional character. Kafka's characters might be fictional, but they are very real fictional characters. They are believable and consistent even when out of character and faced with the absurd. The philosophical backdrop is there. The psychology is mapped out and followed through. Kafka's characters have freedom, and it is for this reason that a man turning into an insect overnight is more believable than a simple sex addict. That seems like it shouldn't be the case, but it is, because the mechanism in which the reader uses to interpret the character of the character can and will detect, often unconsciously, every subtle change in the thought patterns by way of supposition built up through the narrative. Characters change and develop. Their psychology goes with it. Their philosophical positions and views, ethics and experiences alter their progression and move the intended narrative forward. All of this happens while conflict arises, and if it all sits on a well-crafted table, a well-planned mapping, when conflict or change occurs, contradiction won't. And when the villain changes their disposition at a minute's notice, and their heart grows 3 sizes, no one will say that it was out of character or unrealistic. It was presented there all along within the psychological framework found in the mapping of their philosophical worldviews. When you hear that an author must understand or know their characters, this is essentially what they're saying. When you feel that a character in a novel you are reading is underdeveloped or never comes off the pages, it is often because the author may have failed to properly map out the position or worldviews of this character. Their characters don't have a biography. They do not have a family history. or a relatable past of any kind. The author doesn't know how they are to react any more than the character itself. Now, if you're an author watching this and at this point you're thinking that this sounds like way more work than you put into a character, it probably isn't. Unless E.L. James is watching, you watching probably know how to write a character, and you probably do a lot of this without even realizing it. If you tell me that your character smokes clove cigarettes, for example, you didn't just tell me that your character has a bad habit. There's a kind of what you could call a social agreement in subcultures that we all kind of know about but never really discuss in the open. Clove cigarettes carry with them a kind of look. They're thin, black, and whatnot. And when an author specifically points this out, it is not about a bad habit, but tells the reader something about the way this character thinks. Maybe more on the superficial side, caring more about appearances, putting appearances above their health. What the author is doing is revealing the mapped out psychology and philosophy of the character, slowly building it up without the average reader consciously realizing it. We are often given a character who exists in a world that is in complete contrast to every other character in the novel. Not just literally, but sometimes physically. An absurd, chaotic world exists within a realistic setting. J.D. Estrada's Given to Fly is a perfect example of this, and it plays out very well. The character Oddstein presents a charismatic, often absurdist view within a contrasting world. There is a lot of divergence, but there is no contradiction in these separate worlds. This is a common theme you see in children's fiction, in which an imaginative world springs from the foundation of a reality, often in light of real-world conflict. Now, of course, these are just some common rules and/or tropes in this case, and are not mandatory paths that must be explored at all times. The original point here is to reveal what is meant when one states that a character is unrealistic or unbelievable, and then provide a possible solution to avoid this issue. It is not the case that a character is unbelievable because they raise dragons. That is believable so long as the narrative context understands this. A character becomes unlikely only when they step out of their own worldview, either in action and/or dialogue. Going back to picking on Anastasia Steele, why does that name just sound ridiculous? Because it is. One common complaint of her character being unrealistic was her language. At one point in the novel, she calls an email she's writing an epistle. Now, technically, there is nothing wrong with that. But because of the psychological disposition E.L. James bestowed upon this character, something that was built up throughout to that point, it seems ridiculous and just kind of stupid to use the word epistle to describe an email. However, take a character like Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory and have him using the word epistle to describe an email, and suddenly it kind of makes sense, or at least is believable. Now, don't get me wrong, that is a terrible character as well, and just altogether a horrible show, but for completely different reasons. Some of the same reasons. Just making a point here, Sheldon calling an email an epistle somehow makes sense, while it doesn't with Anastasia Steele. There is a reason that something like that is believable for one character and not another, despite them living in essentially the same realistic world we live in. When you understand the psychology of your characters, you know that you have successfully thrown into the world something that truly exists without its permission. And then, from then on, you can throw whatever it is you want at it, and the character will respond without you having to do much work at all. You have, in fact, given them freedom to do so. The philosophical worldview of your character is established. Their thoughts and attitudes toward the world is understood by the author, and it is presented in the character's actions and dialogue. The underlying philosophy does not identify the ethical position directly, but is expressed indirectly through the actions and decisions perpetrated by any given character. The protagonist is therefore in contradiction via worldview or determined objective with the antagonist. Here, the antagonist is not necessarily a personified rival, but as can be found in naturalists such as Jack London or Stephen Crane, nature itself. More than often, the antagonist can be found within the inner nature of the protagonist, where a conflict of values due to outside circumstances occurs. To resolve these conflicts, the philosophical landscape must be to an extent understood by the author but left elusive to the protagonists themselves. And you'll be glad to know that this doesn't demand a philosophy degree or thousands of hours reading through texts with titles like Discourse on the Method of Rightly Conducting One's Reason and of Seeking Truth in the Sciences. I've wasted a lot of my life. As mentioned with the example of the clove cigarettes, this can be developed by way of an intuitive understanding of the world and social norms. Think of how you get to know someone in real life. You don't go up to strangers and ask them how they portray their ethics in their day-to-day and how their philosophical worldview has developed since their childhood. People don't like when you do that. But people in the real world are greatly influenced by philosophies and exposed to worldviews on a daily basis, and very often unconsciously. If you grew up in the 90s, did you ever wonder why that one day, without ever playing basketball, you wanted to own a pair of high-chuck Converse? It wasn't because you thought they were going to be practical come winter. But you who are watching that know what I'm talking about without me having to say anything else. Now, when developing a character, the author understands that this character exists in a world in which these social contracts also occur. If your character is sitting in a basement on a hill listening to Elliott Smith and reading the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, they're probably not also dating the cheerleader. The author first chooses to condemn the protagonist to an invisible world that must be made visible by the natural development that aligns with the fundamental system of thought that is expressed throughout the development of the character. Whether the reader recognizes it or not, every time they open a work of fiction, they're standing at one end of the bridge, staring blindly across. And without seeing the design of an intricate philosophical mapping, it is simply present, looming over the narrative itself. Philosophy and fiction do go hand in hand. Both attempt to reveal truth, both use imagination, often paint metaphor, and try to realize a world that is either misunderstood individually, historically, or any other way one sees fit. Great fiction, like philosophy, is responding to a finite language that tells of what it perceives upon opening itself up to the infinite. If one attempts to practice in either, they are accountable not only to themselves, but all those who wish to engage. Like writing philosophy, to write fiction is the act of achieving insanity without ever going insane, which is enough to drive anyone crazy. In order to remain sane, one must mediate between the real and imaginary and have these two ingredients of the everyday come together in such a way that the one interpreting forgets that that is in fact what they are doing. There is no world without a kind of reality and no reality without a kind of fiction. And before presenting any subject and or object, one must craft a table for these things to stand. All fiction is a grotesque expression of isolation and anxiety recognized through persistent sessions of insanity. The task of the author is to either conceal this fact or present it indirectly as an intersubjective play between author and reader. There will be philosophy, unfortunately, whether you like it or not. Okay, is this working?
Hello.
Is this working?
Is this working? It is. I'm just going to hop on here with you just to transition from the video into the Q&A period.
Okay.
Since I know some of us are okay with technology and some of us are not. So for anyone, yes, Pan Holly, for anyone who is hanging out here now, this is our Q&A session. So this is your chance to ask Pei anything about the seminar that you want to get into or anything else. So fire away.
I've never done a live thing like this before, so I'm just trying to get used to it real quick.
Yeah, it's always a little weird. I think we've done them on my channel, but this is actually like the first one that's ever actually been on your channel. So you're in the hot seat. Daniel, haven't you? I feel like you've done lives.
I don't know if I'm getting comments in the same time. I'm not seeing them.
You're not seeing them pop up?
Oh, no, now I am. Yeah.
Okay. We were just told to refresh the stream, but I actually have no idea how to do that. I just it's going to show up on your account, but I'm asking if it's okay now, because I mean, in my experience, this should be all right. I don't know how else to refresh it. So this is supposed to be the platform that's so much easier to work with. Switch to live. Viewers. Oh, viewers need to refresh. Okay. So we'll give it a minute while people refresh. Because for some reason, when we went to live, it froze for people who are watching. So we'll give it a second here. Okay, coming in fine. It seems like things are getting sorted out here. So Pei, you'll be able to see the comments on the screen. I think you should be able to.
Yeah, so. I can see them now.
Awesome. So we're okay. We're doing all right. Okay. So as everyone, all right, we're all good. So as everyone refreshes their stream, and we have our first question. Here you go.
Is there a particular philosophy or philosopher you would advise reading for learning philosophical architecture in literature? Yeah, I mean, well, there's more or less secondary sources I find a lot to be helpful. For example, though the comment I took from Sartre here was from an interview, and there's been quite a bit written on Sartre's fiction, and it's very easy to find. You can usually find these collected essays and commentary on it, and I find the commentary to usually to be helpful, especially for someone who may not be into reading philosophical language itself, because that can always be a hang up for some people. So but yeah, there's a lot of secondary sources on philosophy and the literature of philosophy, especially with the existential philosophers who all typically also wrote fiction. Let's see. I don't know where Holly went. Oh, my volume just went out.
No, that was me. No. I'm going to pop questions up so that you can address them as we go on the screen here. So
okay. Yeah, I don't know how to do that.
I'll try not to put my face on here too much.
Yeah. Okay. So. Oh, thanks, Lady Jane, for being here. can't see the comments that you're putting up.
Oh no. It was just Daniels that said, I really like the essay of Flannery O'Connor on writing fiction too.
Oh yeah, Flannery. I haven't read as much Flannery O'Connor as I should, and it's been years. I think probably since university that I have. But yeah, I've heard people say the same thing quite frequently. What is the most common mistake you see writers make who incorporate philosophy? Oh geez, what is the most common mistake you? That's gonna be hard to answer because you don't want to. But really, I guess a lot of what I discuss in the video that it just not being developed to a degree in which it can justify certain actions or decisions made, in which then the character seems to kind of be that in that unrealistic state, but but which could come from be for a lot of reasons, maybe not exactly being well read enough on the subject in which they're trying to tackle, but it would be multiple aspects really, and I would almost need to see in a specific example, but that I guess that would be it.
To make sure you saw this one, I just put JP Estrada up.
Basically catching up with everyone. I was out having lunch and was like, "Oh, great to see you, Estrada." Yeah, I mentioned your character Oddstein in this. I thought this is a great example of how one can have these two completely contrasting views on the world that don't actually contradict, but play off each other. So it's good. Good to see you here. May watch later. Sorry?
I was just saying you had a comment about watching more of your stuff later.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I haven't been on YouTube very much recently, and I've been doing this video. I completely forgot how to do everything, so I ran into a lot of problems. So I hope the audio and all came across all right. I tried to fix it, but well,
and it's not just you. I had technical issues. We've both had a fun time today, but I'm glad we were able to make it work.
Are there philosophical ideas that arose in literature for you that you didn't see in philosophical nonfiction first or ever? Yeah, well, that was kind of what introduced me to Sartre. Was before I read, say, Being in Nothingness. I read a lot of his fiction, so a lot of those ideas he talks about, and the one in the video specifically, this idea of giving a character kind of a will of its own, and this particular kind of freedom, I came across in his own work. It can seem kind of sporadic or random, but it's also very. It ends up being very realistic because that is how things just so happen to occur. So so a lot of those ideas came up, and again, as I said earlier, since so many of those post-war 21st existentialist or 20th century, existentialist philosophers also wrote fiction. There's a very good reason in which fiction seems to be a very good medium to portray philosophical ideas, as it does mirror a reality in which we all experience in this, and therefore presenting this kind of phenomenological aspect to that within fiction. Let's see, I could say. Do you have a recommendation for helping writers avoid their own philosophical biases when writing? A fantasy world. Oh, that's. Do I have any recommendations? That's difficult because, of course, so many. It's difficult to recognize these things, but I guess the best way to avoid this as best as possible would be understanding it as well as one can. It's of course easier to fall into biases when you're not actually completely sure where these originate or how they develop or how they affect you in your day to day. So really, just getting to know what they are in every aspect, I would be the best way to do that, and not just for writing. That could be said for living life in general, and when discussing any subject, really. But yeah, say. So, what writer of fiction have you found most philosophically inspired to you? As the intro would suggest, it was Kafka, for sure. That's Kafka, and the typical as well, Dostoevsky, Goethe, and alike, but definitely Kafka. When you get a beta reader, do you give them an intro? I need my glasses. I can't. I'm sorry, it's taken me a minute here. When you get a beta reader, do you give them an intro of what they'll be reading and things to keep an eye out for, or do you leave them to their own devices to see what comes up in their review? I don't. I'll give them a quick synopsis, really, but I don't try to say too much, mainly because I never know if I'm coming across clear or not, and I feel if I explain too much, then I won't know whether I'm coming across clear or not again, as I would have explained it all beforehand. But yeah, maybe just typically what you would, I guess, read on the back of a novel that you see in stores. That's probably the most I give. But yeah, I get it. All depends on exactly, I guess, what it is I'm writing. I've written science fiction in which that would be it, but I have written longer kind of philosophical fiction in which I would give a bit more, I guess, in that case. That was, I think you're on mute, Holly. You can't.
Just hopping back in as we're slowing down on questions a bit. We've still got 12 people hanging around, though. So if you have anything to ask, now is your time, because I don't know when Pei is going to be back on YouTube again.
Yeah, well, I keep writing scripts for YouTube. I'm just not filming them because that's the part I don't like to do. I like writing them. I like doing the research and getting it all together, and then it comes to turning on the camera, and then especially editing it and hearing my own voice over and over again. It's just enough to make you never want to open up a computer ever again. But that's,
yeah, for some reason you don't appreciate your voice and your face, and like that doesn't make sense to me at all.
well, it's not so much I appreciate it or not. It's just I don't know. I can't do it for very long before I just get, it's difficult. Oh, there's another question. What is? Oh, okay. I really should have just brought my glasses. I'm
Daniel,
so sorry. I did not think.
What is it that the philosopher who also writes fiction can gain over just writing philosophical essays, etc.?
What is it, the philosopher who writes fiction gain over just? What is it that the philosopher who also writes fiction can gain over just writing philosophical essays? Well,
well, there's, as I say at the end, I had a lot more on this that I just ended up taking out because it got too far away from the subject. But there, when I said at the end there that both philosophy and fiction get to a truth, these are also two very different aspects of the same truth. Literature, fiction, is being a mode of representation. What it is representing is this aspect of experience we see in the real world, something that philosophy tackles at a more methodological, fundamental level, whereas as fiction is the more expressive experience of that. And so I guess those would be the two different things in which if you write fiction, it's I don't know. Yeah, it depends on how you mean gain in this positive aspect that you. I wish I kind of wish I didn't take what I had out there now, but yeah, I guess if that answers the question, fiction seems like it can be a philosophical proof of a kind. Yeah. I mean, I agree with that, especially in relation to experience. What role? Oh, kind of. I think JD had it. Well, yeah. What role do you think philosophy plays in the world in 2024? Oh, that's a big question. More than a lot of people think. I know. I especially recently I hear people say, philosophy's dead or something, which in itself is a philosophical statement, which immediately resurrects that which they're claiming to be dead. So it doesn't. It's something that's there, whether one wishes it to be or not. If analyzing anything going on in the world, one will have to introduce this kind of philosophy. And yeah, as I stated in the video, it would be better. It's you can make sense of what's happening in the world and in a given situation if you understand these philosophical intentions or of the individuals making certain claims, whether this be political or in your everyday social interactions. Yeah, so I think it plays just as an important role as it ever has, and I don't think that's something that can really be taken away. I think there's a question. Are you familiar with the absolute at large? And so, what philosophical is? I'm not actually. I don't know if I've ever heard of that. I'll have to look that up. I think people overlook it. I think it's a good time to take it up properly. Absolutely, yeah, I agree. So many people wax poetic on a podcast with little to zero substance. Yeah, it's especially on platforms in which anyone can just get on and say anything, and then and it just gets so saturated with it's hard to say what comes through and what doesn't, but yeah, that statement, yeah, I agree completely with what you say there.
All right, hopping in again. So we're in our last 10 minutes here, and I know we've still got some people hanging around. You might be checking up on the stream. So if you are watching back a little bit and you have questions, you should get them in now, because Pei is going to disappear back into his cavern very soon. Got a comment here.
I can't see it. I just my laptop was dying, so I plugged it in, and of course, every time I do that, it shuts off.
It's been a fun technical day today.
Yeah, no, it has not been fun at all.
I mean fun in the least fun way possible. So Penumbra says, I enjoy listening to philosophy, but I have an anthropology degree, so I love the mental consideration of both.
Oh yeah, and I think I could be wrong, and maybe Daniel might be able to correct me on this, but I'm pretty sure philosopher Cadell Last has an anthropology degree. I think these things are go hand in hand very, very, very easily. And again, with something like that, you're taking a very an empirical aspect of study and applying philosophy over this in ways in which I think a lot of people aren't capable of doing so. So I think that's great. Having that degree and being interested in philosophy, a lot of interesting things could come from that. There are days. Geez, there are
Blue screen of death at a keynote speech. I mean, we almost had
that. Yeah, we did. Yeah, it was a bit of trouble getting everything up here, but hope it worked out all right.
Big thanks to Shannon and Margaret for getting it together to move our session later. So.
Yeah, this was supposed to be at 11 my time, and I was up all night putting it together, and I had it done on time, but of course the final rendering, which was supposed to be the one that was easy to do, ended up taking the longest, and it didn't happen.
I mean, it did now, at least.
Yeah. I think the intersection between philosophy and literature is very rich and important. Yeah, it's impossible to avoid. I think.
Agreement on your statement from earlier.
Oh yes, yeah, okay. I was remembering that right. It's so yeah, so the person that had the anthropology degree, I'd highly suggest reading Cadell Last. He might find some common ground there.
So we also had a thank you from Shannon, who's running the conference here, and we want to say thank you to you, Shannon, for inviting us.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been my computer is kind of glitching now.
Shannon says tech gremlins were out in force today.
Oh, they are every time I turn on a computer. The amount, which is part of the reason too, I haven't been posting as much. It's just technology doesn't allow me to do so. It's I don't know what happens when you guys turn on a computer, but mine doesn't. That's about how it works.
I was saying to Margaret how I've never met someone who has this many technology problems. Like, if you're going to face technology, it's going to say no to you like 99.9% of the time.
Yeah, well, and Daniel knows this. We'll be at Philosophy Portals, an organization that Cadell Last runs, and every weekend we get together and discuss subjects. And we'll be sitting there discussing, and my computer will just shut off for no reason, and I'll just disappear from the conversation. And it's I don't know. And it's not the computer. It's just, it doesn't matter what computer I have. That's just the way it
No,
goes.
it's not true, because like you had these problems with one computer, and then I actually gave you a computer that I got from my old work that was like a new computer, and it immediately just started being a terrible tech creature when you got a hold of it. I don't understand.
Yeah, no, it just
weird.
doesn't work. I don't know
Yeah.
what it is, but I was meant to use a typewriter my whole entire life.
Yeah.
Which I'm fine with. I mean, I've never used, before I started doing YouTube, I never really used the internet for much. Maybe for music, but that was about it. It is electrically charged. No, caffeine. I've gotten charged with a bunch of these, which is what kept me going finishing this video. Shut off because the sound's under the desk. I'll be shut off because the forest animals under the desk take out my knees. Yes, that's
Daniel. Don't touch any pretzels. Don't touch any pretzels.
I have no I don't know what that's about. I am not involved in that context.
You heard the videos. Sam is here now.
I've heard videos, but no explanation.
Hello, Sam. You're right at
Sam's
the end.
Hi, Sam.
You're gonna have to go back and watch the presentation. It was a really good one. Now Daniel is talking about pretzels. Never. Sam, there is none. All right. So since they're just a black hole, says Daniel. And Sam says, stop the pretzel madness. On that note, Shannon says 2 minutes until the next presentation. So I'm going to let you wrap this up in however way, you want to. Well, I'll leave and you can talk about whatever you're working on and let people know about Stygian. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. I'm glad I was able to actually get this set up and working. I hope the audio came through all right, because I did have a lot of trouble with a new mic setting it up, but I think I got it well enough to be able to be heard anyway. So thank you all for coming. I think we put links to the Stygian Society in the comments section. I don't know if Holly wants to put those up again. So if anyone's interested in seeing the further work that we're doing, you could go there. And I guess that's all I have to say. Again, thank you everyone for being here. And I have no clue how these lives work, so I'm just going to sit here. You're on mute.
It's always weird wrapping them up, so we're going to wrap it up now.